Hello, we're now at the lecture 3 of chapter 5. We're going to look at taxes and elasticity. And these would be sales taxes, or what economists would call consumption taxes. And we'll be looking at a few things in this lecture on taxes. And the first one is that when a sales tax is levied, who really pays the tax? And it's a common belief that the consumers are the ones who pay the tax. However, our economic analysis in this chapter will show that that is highly unlikely. Rarely do consumers pay all the tax. There's a few cases that are rare that would happen, but in most cases, the consumption tax will be split between the consumers and the sellers. Now, a few terms, first of all, before we go any further. There's a tax legal obligation. That simply is who has the legal obligation to hand the money over to the government. Sometimes it might be the consumer, sometimes, or most times, it'll be the sellers. So the seller the seller in most cases has a legal obligation to transfer the money to the government. So if you buy, say, some items at, say, Target, you buy some shirts, some pots and pans, there's just a sales tax on that. It's Target's obligation to hand the money over to the government. They don't have to charge you the tax. And in fact, there's some cases where you can have a kind of a advertising campaign where you say that you will pay the tax. I think that happens in President's Day weekend. A lot of stores would say we'll pay the sales tax. Now, we're not after that because that's determined by the law. We're after what's called the tax incidence. And this is the division. I'll pause here. Okay, back here. So the tax incidence is the division of the tax burden between the consumers and the producers. So the way we can determine the tax burden for the consumer is the increase in the price paid by the consumer. What's going to happen is that the seller is going to do what's called tax shifting. The seller is going to try to pass on the entire tax to the buyers, and they have every right to do that. The question is whether the buyers are willing to accept that. And so we can tell how much the tax is passed on to the consumers by looking at the price the consumers are paying before the tax and the price the consumers pay after the tax. You may think the price will go up by the exact amount of the tax, and we'll find out that the sellers may try to do that, but it may turn out that that's not what's going to actually happen. The tax burden for the producer is the decrease in price received after the tax money is given to the government. So they get X number of dollars from the consumers, they give X number of money to the government, whatever's left over is what they have. And if that's lower than before the tax, then they have a tax burden as well. So the kind of taxes we have in terms of consumption taxes, there's two main kinds. One is a specific tax. This is a tax per unit. We tend to call those excise taxes. In California, we have an excise tax on gasoline. I think now it's just gone up to 50 and a half cents per gallon. And we have an excise tax on alcohol. I think it's 20 cents per gallon for beer, wine. We have a tax disposal fee per tire, and I think that's now about $1.75 per tire. And those are all taxes per unit. So no matter how much the value is of the item you're buying, the tax remains the same per unit. Then we have what's known as an ad valorem tax, and that is a tax that's based on the percent of the value. So if you're buying something more expensive, the tax goes up. And this would be your typical sales tax. 6% sales tax would mean no matter what item you bought, the tax would be 6% of the value of that purchase. So you buy a more expensive car, you buy a more expensive shirt, then you pay higher tax. I think in California we have a 7.25% sales tax. Many things are exempt, like food, medicine, and then cities and states can add on their own amount as well. I think in San Bernardino County it's 7.75. I have the dollar sign. In San Bernardino County it's 7.75%, and I was looking at LA County, they're 9.5%. And some cities inside LA County have even higher one. I think Monrovia is over 10%. So if you, 10% between 7.75, you might want to think about looking at the sales tax before you buy something in those cities, because when you get 1, 2, 3% higher, that can make it change in the dollar amount you pay. It might be worth it to maybe go to another city where the tax is lower. Now in this class we're going to use specific taxes for examples. Why? Because they're a lot easier. The end result, there's no difference in the economic analysis. It's just that it's a lot easier to use taxes which are per unit. So what happens if there is a tax? Now normally the tax is placed on the sellers. And so let's say there is a $1 tax per unit placed on the sellers. So here we have a table here for supply. This would be supply. We call this supply 1, and that's when there's no tax. And so this is based on the cost of producing an item. So if the price were $10, the sellers would sell 200. And the price were $9, they would sell less because it would not cover the cost of the additional 20 there. And at $8, they'll 160, and at $7 they'll sell 140, and $6 they'll sell 120. So for them to sell more, the price has to go up because their cost per unit are increasing as you increase your production. We'll see more when we get to chapter 7. Now what happens if there's a $1 tax per unit sold? Well, what the sellers have to do is they have to get back to this situation. For example, if they want to sell 120 at $6 of price, and they have to give $1 to the government, well, they have to tack on another $1 to us, right? They don't have to charge $7. If they want to sell 140, the $7 per unit was enough to get them to do that. But now if they have to give $1 to the government for every one they sell, they have to get another $1 from us. And so what this is going to do is cause the supply to shift inward, but in a special way. Before we just shifted supply inward, we weren't concerned about placing it in any particular position, but now we have more information. If we know the amount of the tax, which we should know that because that's what the government is placing on the sellers, then we're able to pinpoint exactly where the new supply is going to go. For them to produce 180, $9 was good enough before the tax, now they need $10. For them to produce 200, $10 was good enough without the tax. If they want to keep producing 200, they have to get that $10 back, and so they have to charge $1 more. And so what this does, it gives us a graph like this. So this right here is the supply before the tax. So this was the $10 for 200, and then we had $9, we had 180 right there, $8, 160, $7, we had 140, and then $6, we had 120. Now for them to keep producing, they have to tack on another $1, right? And so again, we said for them to produce 200, they have to charge 11 up there. For them to produce 180, they'd have to charge 10, and so on. And so if you keep doing that, you're going to map out a supply that looks like this. It's kind of hard to see there. Maybe I can shade it in better. So now we know exactly where the new supply is going to lie. This is actually shifting inward. You can see those arrows right there. But shifting inward, that the vertical distance between the two supply lines is the amount of the tax. So that right there is the tax, that right there is the tax, and so on. So the new supply with the tax will lie inward to the left, but with a vertical distance higher than the original supply by the amount of the tax. And so they will be parallel. And that's why it's easier to use a specific tax, because a specific tax will make the two lines parallel. If you had a percentage tax, ad valorem tax, then it would be different slopes, which is why I don't want to do that. And so now we can pinpoint exactly where the new supply is going to go. So let's follow through on an example. And I've gone about 10 minutes, so I'll stop there.